welcome you to a panel discussion with the photographers Eleanor Carucci, Jonah Frank, and Mike Colster. Today they will discuss what it means to capture a life through art. Each artist has used photography as well as the medium of the book to capture their subjects and to explore complex human interactions. While photography is a form of picture making with which we all have some acquaintance, both as makers and consumers, the eliciting of art from such images requires extraordinary courage, persistence, vision, and purpose. Today, we have an opportunity to hear from three leading contemporary artists who will share what they have learned about capturing and describing lives largely through photography. Following a brief introduction, Eleanor, Jonah, and Mike will each share a brief presentation about their work, following which we will join together for a conversation on stage. This will give the artists an opportunity to ask questions of one another and to explore commonalities and distinctions between their practices. We will then open the floor for a discussion with the audience. We are thrilled that among our listeners are a number of other distinguished artists, and we welcome their participation in our conversation this evening. I will begin now by offering a short introduction for Eleanor, and I will offer a short introduction for each of our speakers before they share their comments and observations with you. Born in 1971 in Jerusalem to a Mizrahi Jewish family of North African, Middle Eastern, and Italian descent, Eleanor Carucci graduated in 1995 from Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design with a degree in photography and moved to New York that same year. Highly acclaimed for her documentary photography, which has grappled with the challenges of family life as a child, a spouse, and a mother, as well as with the inevitability of aging. Carucci was the recipient of an International Center of Photography Infinity Award for a young photographer in 2001, the Guggenheim Fellowship in 2002, and a NIFA Fellowship in 2010. Her work has been exhibited internationally, including at New York's Museum of Modern Art and the Photographers Gallery in London. Her photographs have been widely collected, including by MoMA, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Houston Museum of Fine Art, and the BCMA. Her pictures have appeared in the pages of such leading publications as the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, New York Magazine, W, Aperture, and Art News. Carucci has published 4 monographs to date: Closer in 2002, Diary of a Dancer in 2005, Mother in 2013, and Midlife in 2019. Carucci teaches at the Graduate Program of Photography and Related Media at the School of Visual Arts in New York and is represented by the Edwin Houck Gallery. Please join me in welcoming Eleanor Carucci. Oh. Sorry. They'll take care of it.
Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. So I'm going to start and tell you a little bit about my work. I'm watching the time. So born in Jerusalem to this person, my mother, the first person I photographed where my work started from, a typical Jewish mother that really pushed me and demanded a lot from my classical music, even though I'm coming from a Mizrahi background. My education was very important to her. And she was the first person I started to photograph when I was 15, and everything started from my mother. She opened up to me, and there was so much I could see and feel and understand while photographing her. It was just another level of connection. And even the things that were difficult about my mom were suddenly interesting material for my work, and I decided I want to be a photographer. And this was my first body of work. After the high school, I went to 2 years in the Israeli army, to Betzalel, and I created my first body of work, Closer, that is about my mother, being a woman, being a daughter, and our relationship. And I've had to learn how to photograph the rest of the family as well. And while I was doing this, I realized that I'm aiming to the most intimate and personal parts of my life, but I'm trying to talk about universal themes of what it is to be a human being, emotions and relationships, and the microcosm that exists within the family. Everything is actually there. Even though I'm, of course, influenced by great photographers, Nan Goldin, Sally Mann, Marilyn Mark, I'm also very influenced by stand-up comedy, and we talked about it yesterday a little bit. And so I'm happy to share one of my funny images. My work is usually talking about the everyday theater and drama, but this one is my mom telling me what men want, and I don't have enough time to get deeper into the... This was my first body of work and my first book, Closer, published by this man, Alan Rapp, sitting here. My second book, Diary of a Dancer, portrayed my life as a professional belly dancer, not ballet, belly, Middle Eastern dance. And it was my failing book that I'm sharing here with you. I'm like a rock band with a failing second album. For many reasons, maybe, but it wasn't as universal. People didn't relate to it as much. It was a shorter project. Most of my projects are 7 to 9 years, but still, it's one of my children, and I wanted to share it today. My third body of work was Mother, where I photographed the pregnancy and birth of my twins, Eden and Emmanuel, who are now seniors in high school. I'm about to become an empty nester. And this work was really, I think, different in many ways. It was the first time that I created work out of anger and frustration and a very strong feminist point of view. I really wanted to show not another Madonna and Child body of work, but a body of work that will show in honesty, the complexities and layers of being a mother, the beauty and the ugly, the highs and the lows, and the sensual relationship, something many people don't like talking about, of being a mother. So my third book, Mother. I also shoot for magazines. I just quickly wanted to show some of the work. This is something that I've been doing for the past 21 years. And it's very much a parallel voice to my voice as an artist. My work for magazines is usually personal stories about people, relationship, love, hate, loss, and aging. And motherhood, of course. An unusual assignment, The Colors of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. COVID Hair, a project for the New Yorker about women who stopped dyeing their hair during COVID. And more recently, project, this is about teens' life during COVID, and a project I also photographed my children for. And just to end, my last book that was published about 2 years ago, also by Alan, who is here, who has been supporting my work for 25 years now, is a body of work about being middle-aged and a woman. That's why I needed to have Alan's help, because no one wanted to publish a body of work about the middle-aged years of a woman, which made me even more determined. It was my most courageous body of work, and the one that I felt was so important to put out there. I didn't know I was making the midlife work until about 2-3 years into the project. But when I looked at it at some point and saw the different things, what I thought was different series, I realized this is not just different series. This is me photographing my middle-aged years, my own blood. As you can see here, my blood paintings series, my parents that are getting older, and being the middle generation between older parents and younger kids, youth and older age, and seeing my parents as grandparents and the beauty of that. The kids getting further from us growing up, and the beauty of marriage and relationship after so many years, which is something I think our society don't give much credit for. I wanted to highlight it as one of the themes in midlife. Some of it is very dark. My own uterus, I don't have time to talk about it, but this is my picture that was taken right after I woke up from my own hysterectomy. 3 generation, and the last image of this body of work that I feel proud of, and I think it was my most political statement in many ways, publishing it. So this is it. Thank you.
Jonah Frank, our next speaker, is a nationally recognized photographer, acclaimed for her sensitive portraits of young people, striving to discover, shape, and assert their identity. She completed her BA in English at the University of Southern California and continued at USC to do graduate study in film production. She has exhibited at such institutions as the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Exploratorium, the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, and now at the BCMA in our current exhibition, Jonah Frank Model Home, on view until June 5th. Her work has been widely collected, including by such institutions as the Getty Museum, the Museum of Modern Art San Francisco, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the BCMA. Jonah Frank has published 4 books featuring her photographs: High School in 2004, Right, Portraits from the Evangelical Ivy League in 2008, The Modern Kids in 2015, and Cherry Hill in 2020. In this last volume, which is complemented by Jonah Frank Model Home, a catalog published earlier this year by the museum, Jonah turns her lens on her own life, addressing the intersection between photography and performance, creativity, and personal authenticity. Please join me in welcoming Jonah Frank.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here and not have a mask on. And I'm actually wondering, is it possible for us to lower the lights on the stage? Can we just go much darker in the room? I feel like it makes it much easier to see the... Is that okay? So we were posed with this question about how do you capture a life in art? And I thought about, for me, how much that's evolved in the time that I've taken pictures. And I wanted to just show one series that I did many years ago that doesn't really get a lot of exposure, which was based at a Catholic school where I photographed this one class, the 6th grade class, and I photographed each student in the class until they graduated from high school. So this was Ariel, and this is her throughout high school. And what I was interested in, and what the narrative was an easily built-in narrative for photography, which was simply time and the passage of time, and how her face changed and how her body changed in those 6, 7 years. And I worked like that for a long time with portraiture and doing straight portraiture and looking at portraiture as the product of an exchange between two people, which was a quote that Anne Goodyear gave me many years ago in a conversation. And when I was doing this work, I started to think, this is a different sort of portraiture. It's sort of flipping portraiture on its side, and it's making it a self-portrait. But I also started thinking about this idea of proof. And many years ago in San Francisco, I saw a conversation with Dwayne Michaels, and he showed this picture. And it says, "This photograph is my proof. There was that day when things were still good between us, and she embraced me, and we were so happy. It happened. She did love me. Look, see for yourself." And I thought about this a lot as I began the Cherry Hill work, because I thought, what's my challenge here? My challenge is to create a story about a girl who's, most of the time kind of lost in a reverie and growing up in this strict Catholic home with a repressive mother, and who stood close and fast to all the protocols of motherhood and femininity, and except that story that I want to tell only exists in my head. So how do I begin to tell this story? And because I can't go back in time. And I thought about this idea that I didn't have the proof. What I had were family photos, and so many of us have family photos. And the importance of the family photo to record the things that are meaningful to us. Like on the back of the family photo of our house in Cherry Hill, my father wrote, "Our home." And that these photos represent these moments in our life that say, we've reached a certain place. We had a successful Christmas. The records of we made our first communion, which is the most well-documented event of my life. There are no more, I have more pictures of my first communion than anything else that happened to me. But it also is a grounding, and it tells us this is our origin story. This is where we began. And it's proof that our parents were once young and happy and wanted us to be here, and provided this record. So I wanted to get underneath that, and I wanted to provide a record that wasn't always about the surface and was about getting behind the surface and getting inside the moments of our childhood. And I did I did look at some of these pictures to use as a guide. And sometimes I imitated them. But many, many of the images in the book I just created from my own memory. So in order to do this, I started with trying to find an actor. And I also started to think a lot about designing a set and what the background, how the background could contribute to the story, which is something I was thinking about in all of my work, but now I was going to get much more specific about it. And I wanted clothes in, the ways that the girls were going to be attired to reflect the backgrounds and to kind of blend into the backgrounds. So I started to think about all this, and this was all a precursor to making the Cherry Hill work. And then when I was making it, this one girl, I decided to put a wig on. And when I put the wig on her, I suddenly had this feeling of like, okay, I can find people to represent me. And that made it was a huge turning point for me. And then I had to establish the house, because the house in Cherry Hill and the house throughout the project is a character and is so telling of where my life was. And I wanted to, as the story evolved and as the project evolved and we began to take the book from exhibition, I also wanted to add the layer of really shouting out the artistic meeting the domestic and creating pieces that were not just photographs but were textiles and were always supporting my story. So the house repeats itself multiple ways. And then the idea about being rooted was something that I wanted to always go back to say, these are our origins, these are our beginnings, and this is where our story begins. So I had to really break down how to set these scenes. And I approached it as if I were making a film, because I had some experience with that. And I live in Los Angeles, and I am around people who make films. And so this was a world that was familiar to me. And I began with sketches, and then I began thinking about design, and I designed the wallpaper for my childhood bedroom. And then I thought about objects, and I thought about the weight of an object and how an object can hold emotion. And then I began to build the room. So it went from an empty room to the room of my childhood bedroom to making the picture. So all along in thinking about this and thinking about photography and the way that photography is sold to us is that we make this moment, that we create these moments, these Kodak moments, and we come up with the things that are worthy of a Kodak moment. And I wanted to get underneath that. And I wanted to photograph the moments that you wouldn't photograph. And essentially, the moments that are secrets. And I think that that is something that we do as artists, is we want to open ourselves up and we want to take you into the vulnerable places and show you the things that are often not spoken about. So this moment of coming up with ways in order to convey ideas and to convey emotions, and the idea that all of these ideas of what the perfect home is can be exploded. And the notion of photographing my mother on what would be a gray day, or what she often deemed her funny ways. Days when she shut down and she was inaccessible, and things that I absorbed and noticed but weren't talked about and were certainly never thought to be photographed. So you have the surface, the Kodak moment, where everything is in its place and everything looks great. But then you have the moment of reflection when, as an adult, you can look back on those days and think, maybe things weren't what I thought they were. They weren't what they seemed. And that's part of what I wanted to do, was to get behind the surface ideas and take you into the interior world of a family. And all along, I always wanted to be serving the story, and if it was in the wallpaper, or coming back to the house and feeling weighted by the house, that was my little nod to Louise Bourgeois and La Femme Maison. Or if it was in a birthday cake, that was going to be a really special day, but underneath it, you still felt like something was off. And in the end, I think about this, and just I want to end here to just say that whenever I've made a book, and I too have had the good fortune of working with Alan Rapp, who very much supports female photographers. Thank you, Alan. And every time Alan would say to me, "Who is this book for?" And when this came up, when I was ready for the question, when Cherry Hill was posed, I said, it's for every 15-year-old girl in the world who's trying to figure out their life. And I just thought, this is the first page of the book for every girl in every town who ever thought, what else? And while I was doing the exhibit, I wanted to create that girl. And I wanted to take you inside. And when I was doing this, and I finished it. I had a friend, I sent some pictures to a friend, and she said, she just sent me this in a text, and I just want to read it to you, because she said, these are the physical manifestation of making something that means something to you and putting it into the world. You feel totally see-through, filled up with all your weirdness. And I thought, yeah, that's what the work is about. The work is about what we reveal on the inside, and that's what art is. It connects you back to your origins, and it, and if it's successful, it encourages others to connect with theirs.
Our final speaker today is Mike Colster, a photographer and professor of art here at Bowdoin College, as well as a 2013 John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellow in photography. His photographs are in numerous collections, including the American University of Paris, Princeton University, Brown University, the Center for Creative Photography, George Eastman House, the High Museum of Art, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography. Mike has exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo exhibitions at the American University of Paris, Schroeder, Romero, and Schroeder in New York City, and the Telfair Museum in Savannah, Georgia. He is also the author of 3 books: Take Me to the River in 2016, which was nominated for the Aperture First Book Award, LA River in 2019, and Paris Park Photographs, published earlier this year. Mike holds a BA in American Studies from Williams College, an MFA from the Massachusetts College of Art, and a certificate from the full-time documentary photography program at the International Center of Photography in New York City. While well known for his photographs of landscapes, Mike has also delved deeply into the realms of portraiture and family, as he will discuss today. Please join me in welcoming Mike Colster.
I'm all fogged up. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming tonight or today. And home team bats last, right? And Alan, I got a book project I want to talk to you about, okay? All right. I'm going to show you guys a video, and if any of you guys have seen this before, because I think a few of you guys out there have, play along, okay? Basically, what we got going on is 6 people will be in the video. It's for 30 seconds. They're going to be divided into 2 teams. The 2 teams are a black and a white T-shirt, delineating those teams. And please count the number of times the basketball is passed between the white T-shirts, okay? And you should know that one gender is supposedly more perceptive on this particular activity. So remember, white shirts, passing basketball, count the number of times. Okay, I now owe you an apology. Asking you to count passes was a misdirection. What matters is whether you saw the gorilla. If you did not see the gorilla, you are not alone. Most likely over half of you missed it. It passed through the scene from right to left as you counted passes. I find this to be a compelling example of how tasks or the existence of specific expectations can blind us to other events that occur right in the middle of our field of vision. It's a photograph by Gary Winogrand, made in Los Angeles, 1969. And one of his quotes that I think about a lot says that, "I photograph to see what something looks like photographed." Seems tautological, but it actually goes further than that. I think his quote suggests that photographs can offer alternative glimpses of what surrounds us, new ways of seeing, new ways of thinking that sometimes, maybe many times, the photographer themselves did not even see as the shutter opened to receive the light. Photographs beg us to admit how much we often miss. They imply that our vision and understanding is incomplete. For me, this is both a call to action and a source of hope. As the French philosopher, activist, and mystic Simone Weil once said, "Paying attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." Photographs cannot substitute for the pleasures of seeing the world with our eyes, but they can remind us of the benefits of paying close attention, even if momentarily, to our shared surroundings. It is my hope that as we open our eyes to what we think we already know, we may turn to each other with a similar generosity and see the world anew. My son Calvin is profoundly disabled, the result of a developmental blip in the formation of his brain before he was born over 18 years ago. Sitting at the top of the long list of his conditions, ailments, and impairments are his intractable epilepsy and inability to speak. He requires constant care and oversight. Christy, my partner, and I struggle each and every moment of the day to understand what his behavior might tell us about what he is thinking, feeling, and needing. Taking care of Calvin often means watching him from the periphery of whatever world he inhabits. He does not seem to be aware of being seen, and as a result does not hold still for my camera or anything else for that matter. This act of photographing Calvin this makes the act of photographing Calvin vexing, if not utterly frustrating. In these moments, my inability to forge a bond with him, either spiritually or emotionally, can seem overwhelming. My camera and I remain apart. I realize, too, that this feeling of separation can be common to photographers as they regard their subjects, whether they be people, places, or even things. I suspect this feeling visits all of us from time to time. To be sure, the attempt to portray others underscores how limited our knowledge of another person usually, and maybe always, is, regardless of his age or her state of mind or body, and despite any profound desire on our part to close the gap. Nonetheless, as I regard Calvin, as I hold him in my arms, and he loves to be held, he teaches me that what I want from him matters less than what we can give each other. Looking as an extension of desire is often loaded with expectation. Seeing as an attempt to understand is best attempted without expectations. Some people I know call this discernment. Perception in the absence of judgment with a view to obtaining spiritual direction and understanding. So, the less I think I know, the more I might see. And of course, wonder if others see it too. Emily Dickinson, quote, "Nature is a haunted house, but art is a house that tries to be haunted." Haunting in this context, I believe, points to the shock of discovery, of expectations upended, and greater clarity. But how does one dispense with expectation? How does one see more clearly? It's a quote that I came across by Christopher Banfi in the Believer magazine. But I hesitate to be too mindful, too analytical about the process, since it is a key to serendipity's success. It's playing out that the seeker is only half conscious of what he or she might be looking for. One has to be a little stupid to do creative work. This necessary stupidity probably can't be taught. And yeah, I'm a teacher. You just have to know when and how to deactivate that analytical part of your brain to trust in, well, serendipity. It's another quote that I like a lot. William Stafford, quoted by Robert Adams in one of his articles in Aperture. Smart is okay, lucky is better. And finally, got to put a plug in for the new book, right? Paris Park Photographs. Pre-order it now. All right, thanks, guys. Check, test.
Well, I just want to start by offering another round of applause to thank each of you for your extraordinary presentations. They were just wonderful. Thank you. And before the program began this evening, I asked Jonah and Eleanor and Mike if I could have the pleasure and the privilege of asking the first question. And I'm then going to invite each of them to ask questions of one another. But I would love to start things off with a question about language. And I want to emphasize how eloquently each of you speaks and writes about the work that you do. And I'm very interested to hear each of your perspectives on this mode of juxtaposition, this mode of juxtaposing words and picture, speech and image. And actually yesterday we had a really interesting conversation with Eleanor about the additional layer of language, which can also mean moving between cultures. So let me just start with that very broad question about the relationship between your images and language, and perhaps you'll find that that also fits with the fact that each of you obviously has also translated your photographic practice very successfully into the development of books. So maybe that's an element of what you'd like to share, but I just would like to open up by thinking about language and photography. Do you want to start?
The non-English speaker will start. I feel, Jonah's work has like more words in it, but I feel that actually for me, photography comes as something that is so universal, and somehow to compensate for the fact that I'm not a native English speaker, same as dance. So the two mediums that I've done most of my life are not language dependent. But then there is also, and we did talk about it as well, especially today, what it is to be an artist in a world that is filled with photographers, maybe not professional, but we all have our smartphones and people are taking sometimes pretty good pictures, which is a terrible thing to a professional photographer. And I do feel that writing and speaking became more important as it distinguished us from the masses of picture makers out there in the world. But language has always been a bit of a struggle for me because I would happily switch to Hebrew right now, but I don't think it will go very well. So your thoughts, guys?
Quote William Burroughs, language is a virus from outer space.
Okay, I can quote Dorothea Lange and say that all photographs are fortified by words.
Nice.
So, so, what was that one? I didn't hear.
I said ping pong.
Oh, no, but I mean, I would say that, you know, in my earlier work, I wasn't thinking about how language could play a part. I was just strictly about the photograph. And one thing that comes to mind is that my first book, which was high school, and it was all these portraits of high school students, I had started working with a publisher who I'd done these essays, and where I interviewed all these high school students, and this publisher became very interested in the essays and wanted the book to be the essay. It was kind of like a survey kind of thing, where they answered questions. So their questions answered their portrait. And I was adamant that it not be that, because suddenly it said, if John is answering the question and this is John, this page is all about John. And what I wanted was it to be this, any kid, like this sense that you could have known this person. I didn't want him to have a name. I wanted him to just be the punk kid. And it was intentionally about stereotyping and the idea of how these social groups perpetuate themselves in high school. And I didn't want language with the pictures. And we didn't move forward with the book at first because that was such an issue. So it took me a while to think that words and images should be paired up. And so much so that in Cherry Hill, there are words on the pictures, which feels like exactly how it should be. They should be integrated in that way because there is an effort to kind of give equal weight to the words and the images. And as much as I could in that book, I wanted to show and not tell. And there's even a sort of a brevity in many of the stories where they're meant to feel like photographs, where you may finish the story and turn the page and think, I want more, I want to be told more, but you're only going to get that framed. You're going to only get the section I'm going to give you. And I'm also asking the reader to look at the photographs and look at what's being communicated in the photographs, and think about how what you've read supports that, or how what you're seeing supported the words. So it's something that is the dynamic of which has really changed for me, because I think language is now a very integral part of my making work, and it will continue to be.
If I could retract my glib. Basically, I think of making photographs and also what's involved in making photographs as incredibly related, almost mapped, not precisely, but very wonderfully analogous to the act of writing. And I think that we learn how to read photographs in a similar way that we go through and learn how to read words. And I think about Walker Evans's photographs, where he delighted in the shape of letters, and the way that the letter comes to signify certain things in a parallel way that a photograph of a house starts to signify certain things. It's really analogous. And I've found that in most every instance, reflecting on and using the feedback loop of making photographs feels so similar to sitting down and trying to struggle through the writing and the understandings about the photographs, and it becomes very iterative as well. So it's really hard for me to think of these things as not being really kind of the same thing. Writing for me is way more painful, but it's still, I've learned so much about my work as a result of sitting down and trying to tell the truth about it in words, as I have in seeing the photographs that come up and going back out and making more in response to them. So, really similar.
Yeah.
Thank you each. It's fascinating. And as we sort of think about this, and perhaps I'll sort of think about Sebastian Urli, whose class we had an opportunity to visit with earlier today, and think about this act of translation between photographs and words. I'd love to ask each of you now, as we think about this movement into words, whether you have questions for one another about your respective practices or choices that you're making. But I think it would be a pleasure just to hear how you read one another's work, and questions or observations that it may prompt you to have.
Can I ask Eleanor a question?
Please, yeah.
What's fascinating to me in the photographs of yourself is that I think many people look at the photographs and accept them as this is what's happening and this is what's real and this is as if it were just encountered. And at the same time, you're making the picture, okay? But you're in front of the camera. So how does that work for you to make photographs of yourself, yet still be the one that is, in a sense, responsible or the constructor of the image?
This is relating to my question to Jonah, but I will answer. I think, first of all, I forgot to mention that on top of classical piano and photography, I also studied acting. And this is very related to what you're asking. I'm definitely acting in front of the camera, parts from my own life. And in a way, staging and working with my family and with the people I shoot for magazines, which is related to the question I'm having for you about working with actors, coming from an autobiographical place. So, and on top of it, I married a photographer, and he is my assistant on commercial and editorial shoots, and whether he likes it or not, my assistant 24/7 in the last 28 years. So this is also coming handy. And whenever we fight, I'm like, remember those moments when you need his skills? And it does help me a lot with the lighting and with, someone is laughing there hard. We're gonna have to talk after about husbands. But there is definitely, I mean, I'm aiming for a very deep truth, and I'm taking it from my life, but a lot of staging and planning and acting and working with people and directing them is becoming a part of.
So just to follow up, and this will also apply, I think, to Jonah's work too, is to what degree embedded within that are moments of discovery and surprise?
A lot, especially when it comes to other people. And like, especially with my children, now they're getting older, but many moments I planned and wanted to photograph turned out to be something completely different. I have to let go of the plan because it's not working, but follow something else that is happening.
You hear that, students?
And always make pictures, so among students, the many bad and mediocre pictures, some good ones hopefully happen. But bringing the question to you, Jonah, about also what Mike was asking, surprises and mistakes and accidents, but also working with actors to portray truthful and real moments embedded in your memory.
Right, right.
Just if you can talk about that and how it is different from working with real, with people who don't supposed to represent someone else, if it's different.
I mean, for me, it has felt extremely different because I would work with people and put them in their environments. I mean, I would have people choose where they were comfortable to be photographed because I felt like that was conducive to them being comfortable, simply just being okay being in front of the camera and being in a space that they liked. But here I had to take these totally blank spaces and create these environments that, I knew best, and that were from my childhood. I mean, it was like time travel. And to find the pieces of my life and my past that could fill these rooms and could make them feel authentic. And I had never worked with actors. I had made films, I had directed commercials, and I worked with actors doing that, but that's a very different area to go down because you're not really trying to get them to emote something. I mean, they're trying to sell you something. So it's a different world. And I would say that one of the things that really made it effective was having the absolute good fortune to work with someone like Laura Dern, because she is an unbelievable professional, but she just knows where to be, where to stand, where the camera is. She knows how to take something a little bit further. She worked incredibly well with kids because none of the kids were professional actors or had, been on sets before. And they were all kind of just kids in the neighborhood that I was, making this with. And she did something the first day that we photographed. She did two things. So one of the first pictures made was the cover of the book, which is Laura holding this pie in her orange polka dot dress and the young actor mimicking her with the pie in a smaller orange dress. And I had that picture in my head. I knew what I wanted. I had storyboarded it, I showed it, we planned everything out, and we got the picture, where she's smiling intensely and the girl's there and it's the moment. And I thought, well, that's it. And she said, let's just do a few more. And when we did a few more, she did the thing where she looked frustrated, where she was trying to fix the girl's hair, where she worked with her, and the girl had that look on her face like, she basically said, you're not doing it right. And so the girl looked a little confused. And she created this moment. And it was brilliant on her part because it helped me see, okay, I get the image in my head, I think I know what I want, and I'm being so specific about this, but there's always another side. Mm-hmm. And since it was so early in the project, it was such a wake-up call for me to say, I always have to look underneath the moment that I think I want and see what else is there. And what worked so nicely about that is that in the book, in Cherry Hill, it's the cover of the book, but it's also almost at the end of the book, you have the alternative version of how, the day wasn't just a Kodak moment, that the memory of it was sort of painful. And the memory of trying to perform and be perfect for her mother was actually, not what the picture shows. And she also that day, we did another picture that day with the broken plate of food, and she's at the sink and she's having a bad day. And all the props were laid out for her to work with. And she said, I'm gonna go through these very slowly and pick certain things up and hold them and look through them because we're shooting stills and not motion. And so I'm gonna look at this as an exercise. So while she did that, I read a passage from the book about depression. And she got it was very moving. By the end of it, she cried and I cried. And so it was this kind of opening up of how to do this project and the idea of if you create these scenes, encourage, if it's her or a child, whoever it is, to go through it slowly. And also to always think about the alternative from what I storyboarded and what I, feel like is the moment.
Because she's revealing to you something that feels right about your life in opening up what you're saying for interpretation. So it's,
yeah, and that was strange at times, definitely.
do I have time for a question?
Yes, absolutely. And then after that, we'll open it up to the audience.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about photographing your son. And this is something I don't have the answer for with myself, because I think I do. I feel that most of the time photography brings me closer to the people I photograph. And sometimes even give me an excuse to be there, to ask for more, to invite myself. And I wanted to ask if you feel the same, that it's bringing you closer to him, or is it another way of communication, which I know is challenging?
That's a really great question. A lot of my experience in making portraits and photographing people has kind of been the opposite. But in the case of Calvin, been photographing him his whole life, one of the questions that comes up is whether anyone would ever care about them, okay? Because they're just family pictures, right? And so you got to figure out, like you were saying about the Instagram versus, real stuff, I guess. But what's interesting is that I think of it, there was an interesting moment that started to make me feel as though I was able to get closer to him and begin to bridge the gap a bit, which naturally I think occurs when there's a camera that's in between two people. And that's kind of what I mean by sometimes it does separate us. But in the case of him, I started photographing myself with him. And so that the pictures that I showed with me in them with him were kind of a really weird breakthrough. And it's like, well, okay, it only took me 18 years. But, you know, that's, you know, better some than nothing at all, right? And so that it was, in fact, when I'm starting to work with him, and in some ways giving up some of that control, because that was my frustration, was that he would not hold still. Right. He doesn't collaborate. And the joys of working with someone and photographing them is to work together in a conversation, and I can't have that with him. And so I realized, well, then put myself in there with him and give that up. Now, give it up to some extent, right? Because as soon as you try to construct a picture, even though you're in front of the camera, and that's why I asked you that question, both of you guys, is like, how do you begin to know what the picture is going to look like? How do you begin to make it look in a way that you want? And then I realized, well, pictures, in some ways it's wonderful because pictures can kind of start to make themselves if you put the right conditions in place. And that meant that I could hang out with him while we did that. But, you know, so it was a recent important moment in trying to think about that, or trying to deal with it.
I have only 50 questions more for Jonah and 51 for Mike, but we have to stop me.
Yeah, so
Well,
I
no,
look forward to that.
I'm hoping and anticipating that probably lots of people feel like you have 50 more questions for each of these amazing photographers. And I just thought it would be fun to take advantage of this opportunity to engage our audience, largely because I know so many of you make art in different media. And George, that certainly applies to you. If I can invite you perhaps to be our first questioner from the audience.
Is he a plant?
And George, maybe you just want to say a word about the work that you make.
No, I had the privilege of working on a musical program for Jonah's exhibit, Cherry Hill. And looking for an angle for that, I found that there's a long history of music, to children, for children, by children, and about children. So I put together a program which I'm very grateful she took the time to listen to one evening when she was here working on her exhibit. Having read your incredible memoir, there was a statement I'm going to paraphrase to the effect of, maybe we are two. Do you recall that statement? And I really, having read that entire memoir, that stood out to me. And I was hoping you'd just tease out your thoughts around that idea for us and explain a little bit what that is.
Well, I think that it's really about that we all have an interior and an exterior life. And that when I say that I apply it to childhood in this way, that maybe we do perform for the people in our life, you know, the teachers and the coaches and our parents. You know, we try to fulfill this idea of what they want us to be, but at the same time we're developing who we want to be on the inside. And that, you know, it was, for me, it was it was a break that I knew I had to make, that I could no longer, I think I held so much of it inside for so long and performed in this way that childhood felt performative, but I wasn't the person that I wanted to be. And it's so funny because in a conversation with Laura, like when she first read the book, she said that she was really struck by this idea that you knew who you were so clearly and everybody else told you you weren't that person. Mm-hmm. And that multiple times I would try to say, no, but I really like this and I love photography, and then you don't know yourself. And so that was very confusing because I wasn't challenging. I mean, I was a pleasing child that didn't want to fight people, and I wasn't really argumentative. So I was pretty passive about it. And then I sort of realized, that I have the life that I can only live for myself, and that I couldn't fulfill their obligation. I would never be able to fulfill their obligation. I mean, and that is what the picture of the girl in the toile dress against the toile wallpaper in the book is about, they just want me to be part of the wallpaper, and I can't stay that child. And so the coming of age was really difficult for me, and I think that it is in all the work that predates Cherry Hill, because all of that work is about these attempts at becoming, and my curiosity of how do you find your identity. And I was very curious to look at all these other adolescents and say, tell me about yourself and how did you discover your identity? And I think coming out of that and doing that for years made me think about, you know, how that struggle of my own identity and then wanting to tell that story.
Just really quickly, the one thing about the research in child development for parenting that I learned in all the books that my ex-wife and I worked on when we had children was letting a child own their feelings, letting them own what they feel and why they feel it and when they feel it. So I just wanted to follow up with that. That was a brilliant analysis of that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, gosh. Thank you so much for this. I have a million questions, but I'll ask the one that I think I can most succinctly summarize right now. And I'm really fascinated by what has already been said about writing and photography. And this one question is really about sequence and seriality. And when I think of a work of writing or a work of fiction or story, there's always a beginning and an end, versus I feel like with photography, so much times it's much more open-ended, and maybe the sequence is not as fixed. But when you publish, say, a book of photography, how do you work with the structure of there having to be a page 1 and page 500? And is that a structure that you have to grapple with at all? Or do you think of them as very independent beings, as in the series of project and then the book itself as sort of a complementary part 2? I don't know. I'll leave it there, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Alan?
Yeah, you ask Alan, who would say there's no way you're doing a book of 500 photographs.
It's, I feel it's really the most challenging thing to make a book out of body of work. And also there is no room for mistakes. Like, an exhibition will come and go, maybe it will travel, maybe we can change it. With a book, like, it's so final, and for me also it's so accessible. Everyone can buy my book. It's $28 on Amazon, unfortunately. So the most work is for me has been in the books, but it's very difficult. I mean, I know that the sequencing is so hard. I can't do it digitally. We make small prints, and I clear my kitchen and living room, and then Alan is moving in, and we're creating the book on the floor for days and days so we can see it all. And then there is the A pictures, sometimes we pull the B pictures, sometimes we're looking in the C pictures. I once found a cover in one of the images, I thought. So while you're working on the book, you kind of also understand your own work, and you have to define everything, the titles, the essays, and collaborate with other people. So it's a very intense and important, maybe the most important project for me has been my 4 books, even the failing one, number 2, not yours.
I mean, I feel like I've always thought about it just because I'd studied filmmaking, and I think I thought about it as editing, and that one of the things I love about photography books is this sense that, and especially if it's a good photography book, if you have this sense of it being a one-to-one cinema that you can have your own personal experience with. And that is how I approach putting a book together and editing it, is that, you know, if I'm on this page and I turn the page, where am I taking people? But they're not, of course I want them to stand alone, but it's in the unity of it that I think tells a bigger story, and that is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely the best part of the book is the sequencing. It's just the best. And as far as I'm concerned, it's like the heart of it. And then just like the gorilla, you know, if you put one photograph next to another, you might see the gorilla, or if you put another next to it, then you do. there's a certain way that you see pictures differently because of what precedes it and what comes after it. It's just the same as going back to language. If you're gonna write a sentence, your understanding of what that sentence says is dependent on how you structure and sequence the words. And so it's really exciting. It's, fraught with all sorts of other kinds of emotions too, but it's still really exciting to start to actually see things in the pictures that personally I hadn't even known were there by putting them up against different pictures. And then the problem, of course, is that, yeah, the expectation is that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, but I'm not so sure if we're dealing with the same kind of thing. I don't think about them necessarily as telling stories, as suggesting paths and enlarging what you think actually is possible from the individual pictures when you think of how they're working together as a whole. So it's maybe like a note, George, in a musical piece, and you can hear the note. And honestly, I don't think that much about the primacy of the individual picture. I think individual pictures absolutely matter, but they matter way more when you put other pictures with it. So the book is, I think, the most amazing and fantastic expression of a body of work. And the permanence and the accessibility and the reproductions that you can get out of books these days, they rival the prints. They really become works of art. And like, wow, I mean, how fantastic is that? Fantastic, yeah.
Well, I hate to say this, but our hour together has come to a close. And I actually like ending on this note that has to do with sequence and the ways in which juxtapositions help us to see things in new ways. And I just want to thank each of you again, Jonah, Eleanor, and Mike, for presenting your work back to back and giving us an opportunity both to see your work in you, but also for nuancing it through your descriptions of it, through your engagement with one another, through your engagement with the audience. And thank you all for being part of this conversation. Wonderful.
Thank you.